Welcome to Honest Conversations. This is Mand-Lakhiani, co-founder of Mind Valley, and today I have a wonderful guest, Maria Sosa. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
The conversation today is, I don't want to butcher it because I think the phraseology of this conversation is super important. So how to set realistic expectations in our relationships. And I know that Maria does speak about boundaries quite a lot. I'm sure that's going to be part of the conversation, but it's not just, it seems to be my favorite topic nowadays, boundaries, but it's going to be about expectations as well. And I think it's a very interesting topic. And before we go into the conversation, I want to read out to you Maria's bio. Just a second. So Maria Sosa is a bilingual, multi-passionate, holistic wellness writer, educator, therapist, and human. She's best known on social media as Holistically Grace. So you can follow this handle, where she shares practical and compassionate content in the hopes of inspiring those looking to thrive and grow in their personal and interpersonal relationships. So welcome, Maria, now officially.
Thank you.
I want to ask a question about expectations. And in personal growth, there's this interesting idea that expectations are kind of the thing that ruins people's happiness, because it is usually the failed expectations or unmet expectations that make us feel unhappy. I'm simplifying, of course. So is there such a thing as healthy expectations? And maybe we can talk about expectations in general. Is it okay to have expectations? Is there the right way to have expectations? Or is it true that any kind of expectations are always a slippery slope?
Yeah, so I think with anything, there's this gray area in between of when we are being very rigid with our expectations. So expectations is essentially our inner hypothesis, or this way of how we expect things to be, or how we hope things will look like, right? So we create these ideas, or we have these patterns that we have seen before, either from our upbringing or from our experiences, and even from our culture and the standards that we have wherever we may be living, and also within a specific time frame. So the expectations that we may have had for ourselves in the 1800s are not the same expectations that we have for ourselves today, right? So there's all these different layers, and they're all encompassed within a time frame. And so when we get very rigid with these expectations in terms of only if it looks this way, and this way that I'm creating in my head, if it looks this way, if it feels this way, if it smells this way, only then will I be satisfied, or only then will I feel like I've accomplished this either personal goal or relational goal, or this life that I had envisioned for myself. So are expectations in and of itself good or bad? No, I think it's something that is neutral and that provides information about what is important to us, and also something to explore, to understand where these expectations come from, why it has to look this way, who decided what these expectations look like, and are they in some way, shape, or form helping us and guiding us towards this growth, or are they hindering us and kind of keeping us stuck? Because more than likely the stories that we create for ourselves in our head, and for our relationships as well, are very hard to come across exactly in the way that we have pictured it.
But if any kind of expectations are not met, there is a moment of disappointment, I guess, right?
Yeah, so there's what I like to call this idea of the gap. There is, and this is where we feel this discomfort, and this is the gap between where things are and where we would like things to be, right? When we are in this space of, I had this idea, I had this envisioned, and this is where I'm at right now. And how do I bridge this gap between these two things that I'm kind of holding? That's where the discomfort comes from. That's where we feel, the sense of sadness or the sense of disappointment. And so it's useful to kind of dig in a little bit deeper into that. And I know that you said, this idea of like expectations, but I really like the idea of having standards for ourselves as opposed to these expectations, because expectations are very controlled. And again, they're built on these stories and they're built on a little bit of rigidity, but standards are just this level of quality that we want to strive towards. So more of like, there is no destination, which is what an expectation is. A standard is we're just constantly working towards a level of quality of sorts.
So I want to chart some territory from the beginning, because I know that in the topic we did mention personal and interpersonal relationship. So without the interpersonal relationship, it wouldn't be probably a question. But when we talk about personal, that means a relationship with self, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, it's definitely that relationship that we have with self. So we exist in relationship to everything. We have a relationship with ourselves. We have a relationship with our family members. We have a relationship with these expectations as well, right? So sometimes these expectations can be unhealthy. So we have an unhealthy relationship with the expectation. So it starts within ourselves and then it expands to all these different areas within our life.
So I'd like to start maybe with the self, because I think it's the first relationship that comes to mind.
Yeah.
What are the examples of unhealthy or rigid expectations to self, which we might have? Because expectations somehow are associated, at least for me, with a relationship with other people, where you go into a relationship and you expect a friend to be a certain way or a romantic relationship to be a certain way. But when it comes to self, it's a little hard to imagine that we might have expectations, especially rigid and unhealthy type of expectations towards ourselves.
Yeah, so one of the main ones that I talk about is this perfectionism, which often gets the big thumbs up from our society in terms of, oh, the worst quality that I have in myself is that I'm a perfectionist. And I think, oh, help us, because, more than likely we're probably having these unrealistic expectations of ourselves, of everything to be perfect, of everything looking a certain way, and kind of missing all the other opportunities to enjoy the things that may not look perfect, but more than likely are teaching us or helping us grow in some way, shape, or form. And then perfectionism as a whole just causes a great deal of stress and anxiety, because we're trying to meet this expectation that we may have had growing up, that may have been instilled within us from our childhood. And again, culturally speaking, we really give a gold star to these perfectionists. But it's never enough, right? So with perfectionism, there's this feeling of never enoughness. There's never enough that I can do. There will always be more. And so that leaves us with this sense of, I'm not content. There will never be this sense of contentness within, because there will always be more. And now this doesn't mean, well, then I'll just be mediocre. And, if I'm not striving for this perfection, what am I striving for? And you're just saying that we shouldn't try. And that's not it, right? So we're striving for excellence. We're striving to do the best that we can, understanding that we're humans, that we will make mistakes, that this path of life and our journey is filled with so many experiences along the way, and it doesn't have to look perfect to be good enough. We don't have to have these unrealistic expectations that are doing more harm to our mental health than just striving for excellence and working through things and understanding that mistakes are okay, that repairs are okay, and that more than likely we will fail and we'll learn from it, and that'll be part of our journey.
I want to but slow down here a little bit more, because even the choice of replacing perfectionism with excellence is still a fairly tough thing to accomplish, because excellence does in a way mean perfection, but maybe in a different angle. So I would anticipate that why people strive for perfection, so even wear it as a badge of honor, is because it seems like it's the fuel for accomplishment, for achievement. And the question is, what is the healthy expectation then you can have towards yourself, so that you do strive for, well, becoming better, but don't get stuck in self-criticism and discontent with what you have right now?
So excellence is essentially striving towards best. So striving towards this sense of improvement, working towards something as opposed to arriving, which is goes back to this idea of expectations versus standards. So the expectation is it has to look specifically like this, right? Perfectionism is very similar in that sense of has to follow A, B, C, D. And if it doesn't follow that pattern or that flow, then it is a waste. It is all or nothing mentality. It's, I can't believe I didn't, follow through on it this way. I can't believe it didn't look this way. I can't believe that I didn't achieve this. And then internally, I'm just a waste, right? The excellence component is I'm constantly striving for this. There is no real end point. Yes, we may have goals, but we're just constantly working towards this improvement of ourselves, towards this growth. Did I learn from this? What did I kind of pick up on this? Even if it didn't go according to plan, even if it didn't check all the boxes, what will I do differently next time? And how do I give myself grace also to do things differently next time, as opposed to shutting down and going on a downward spiral that is very common in perfectionism, and then almost kind of shutting down and saying, I'm not doing this again. I'm not trying because I'm just going to fail. So that excellence is just looking for improvement and that constant quest, as opposed to meeting these unrealistic expectations that we as humans, we're not robots. Essentially, we're just not robots.
Mm-hmm. So we'll shift to the relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Is there any transition you would like me to actually go through if we're going through from relationship to self to relationship with other people? I believe we'll be talking about romantic relationships more than anything, although yeah.
So actually that is a good segue point. So if we're thinking about this idea of perfectionism within ourselves, right? And if that's the expectation that we have for us, more than likely, that's going to be the expectation that we have for our partner or for the relationships that we are in. So if we are looking for that within ourselves, then the expectation is that our partner will also be doing things in the same way. It will have to follow this pattern. It will have to look like this. It will have to feel like this. And if it isn't done this way, then it's just a waste. Then I'm disappointed. Then this relationship isn't working. Then we're done, essentially. Right. So that's kind of like a good segue point in terms of how these internal expectations for ourselves also are reflected in our interpersonal relationships.
And of course, the logical question would be, well, I think it's logical. What are the healthy expectations in a relationship? And a little bit of clarification. I get the idea that expectations is a very rigid picture of how things should be. Yet on a little bit more chill note, when we go into a relationship, we have an expectation of a relationship succeeding in one way or another, or a relationship going on. Like even well, when you get married, you expect the marriage to last, right? If you have a romantic relationship, you expect a relationship to be there. So is that even possible to not have any expectations in a relationship? Okay, romantic relationships aside, even with children, you do have certain expectations that a child has to behave in a certain way towards a parent, and so on with friends, right?
So I think you make a great point. Expectations are going to come up, right? It's not this idea of, it's kind of like if I asked you not to think about a white elephant, right? You're going to think about the white elephant. That's just what it's going to happen. Same thing with expectations. We're going to have an idea because our brains are constantly in planning mode. We try to envision, we try to see how this goes because that's just how our brains are programmed. So of course, 100%, we're going to have these expectations. It is realistic to have them. How we want to work with that is to kind of explore them or have a sit down with these expectations and kind of gather the information about what these expectations mean, where the expectations came from, and kind of giving ourselves a little bit of space for these expectations or ideas that we have to maybe not come out or not kind of follow through in the way that we have envisioned, and it still be good enough. So is it going to happen? Yes. Do we want to kind of explore these a little bit further, dig a little deeper? Definitely.
So since I like the idea of exploring and digging, because I think curiosity is much more exciting fuel for growth than anything else. But I want to explore a little bit. We've come across a few words now, and I want you to maybe define them or compare them. We were talking about expectations, you were talking about standards, and there were also boundaries that I mentioned in the very beginning.
Yeah.
What are the differences, or are these things somewhat similar? And is it just the terms you're using? What's the most important about understanding the three?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a four as well I haven't thought about yet.
I'm a big words person, so I kind of like deconstructing words, and the kind of therapy that I practice is narrative therapy. So that looks like looking at our stories and the words that we utilize to make sense of our world. So one of the things that I would do working with a client would be to break down some of these words, actually. So while this definition is mine, I encourage everyone to kind of look at these words and break them down and see, like, what does this mean? And how would I know that I was setting these expectations, that I was setting these standards? So there's always this idea of, I'm going to share this, and also be curious in setting your own framework or setting your own language for yourself to live the world in the way that you best see fit. So for me, these expectations are these ideas, these envisionings, these stories that we tell ourselves about the world and how it should look like, how we should look like. So this idea of should is in there. And then the standards are just levels of quality that we want to set for ourselves, because these are important to us. So the standards that I have for myself and for my relationships are very different than the standards you may have for yourself and your relationship. So there's definitely this individualized component to that. And then boundaries are the limits or the things that we are okay with and not okay with. And this can range from rigid to loose. So we can be very rigid in some areas of our lives, and we can be very rigid with our work boundaries. So we don't allow anybody to come into our space, or we don't allow information to come from that workspace. And then we may be very loose within our family structures, and it looks very different, and we're fine with kind of having them in our space. And so those are the three differences for me. And again, words. So we get to define them, we get to do what we want with them, and see what fits best for us.
It's interesting. We do talk about boundaries lately, at least on this show. Somehow we've had a few sessions in a row where we talked about boundaries. But when it comes to standards, I actually haven't had a conversation about that for quite a bit. So could you maybe set an example, or where could we have the standards in relationships? And we could, for clarity, we could talk about, romantic relationships as the primary form.
Yeah, perfect. So one of the standards that I have in my interpersonal relationships is accountability and repair. And this is something that's a must for all relationships. This idea of being able to take ownership for your role in what has ever happened, as opposed to putting the blame on that other person and expecting that person to, take that off of you. You play a role in the relationship. If there's two people, there's three people, you play a role in the cycle in some way, shape, or form. So if your standard is, I have this standard that when something has transpired that was not okay, my standard is that we will take ownership and that we will repair after this, right? That's a standard. That's a level of quality that I want to have in my relationship. An expectation would be, I want you to cook me breakfast. I want you to bring me flowers. I want you to create this, scenario where you apologize to me in this specific way. This is how I envision repair, right? And that's controlling, that's micromanaging, that's making it look like how you want it to look like in your head. And the other person might have a very different way of meeting this standard of accountability and repair. And so we can see the difference there in terms of we're getting to the accountability. The person is taking ownership. There is a conversation about how to repair standard. The expectation is, and this is what I want it to look like specifically. And that is controlling. And that is where we kind of get into trouble because we're not able to see how this other person is able to meet this standard, but quite possibly not in the way that we would have done it.
But on the other hand, there are people who wouldn't take responsibility for whatever transpires in a relationship. So what's the difference between expectation and standard in that particular example? The person might say, well, you expecting me to take ownership of any or take any of the blame in this is an expectation, and it's unreasonable, and you're trying to control me. How do you know that it is a healthy standard versus a rigid expectation, which is maybe encroaching on another person's freedom?
Yeah, so these are conversations that obviously need to be had before anything really transpires, right? So these are the conversations that you would be having about needs, essentially. And kind of when you get to know that person and you are having conversations about the relationship and opening up about these are the things that I want in my relationship. These are the things that I look forward to doing with you or experiencing with you. And then when something happens, it's kind of like this conversation has been primed. We have talked about it. It hasn't come up out of nowhere and I'm expecting you to just all of a sudden, take accountability for this. And there's also a time frame here. We may want that person to take accountability and responsibility right away. That's the expectation. But the reality is that everybody has their own timeline. So that may look like, hold on, we just got into an argument and I can't string along 2 words. I may need to go for a walk just to decompress, and we'll talk about it when we get back. Right. So that is, again, meeting this level or this standard of quality that we want to have in our relationship, but in a compromising kind of way where we're able to have our own sense of agency. Right. So I understand and I value that this is important for you, but I also exist within this relationship and I'm not quite ready to talk about it just yet, but we will, because I know that it's important for the health of our relationship. And both of the individuals have to want to work on it. So there has to be some sort of agreement that this is a shared value and it is important for the relationship. So kind of like we both have to buy into this standard so that it makes sense for us.
If we have a conversation and decide, I think it's easier to have conversations when you are in a good mood.
Oh,
100%. Both are
100%.
optimistic and you're like, yes, sure, we'll be discussing things, we'll take our share of responsibility. And then when the emotions are high, for example, what to do if the partner, your partner or the counterpart in this relationship is okay in theory, but in practice refuses to meet your standards.
Right, which is often what actually does happen, right? So we have these beautiful laid out plans and then emotions happen. Emotions get in the moment and we have anger and we're upset and we're not able to see right because, again, we're humans and we have, this part of our brain that's very feeling and emotional and it's not connecting to the prefrontal cortex, which is very logical and it's analyzing things. We're feeling more than thinking, and that's part of it, right? So I think part of that is understanding that we're going to have conflict, that we're going to make mistakes, that it's not going to look the way, again, even when we have this standard, it's not always going to look exactly the way that we had set forth for this conversation to go. We can plan it, and then in practice, it looks different. As long as we get there, as long as we make this repair on our, relational time, that's what matters, as opposed to, in the moment, or how I guess this goes back to this idea of like expectations again, of how I pictured it or how I wanted it to be. And again, totally normal. It's kind of like the same white elephant of that's what I wanted it to look like, and that's how I thought that it would. But we see ourselves within our relationships, and we know that there's some things that we're willing to take ownership for, and kind of say, okay, yeah, I definitely did that. And there's sometimes where we dig our heels and we say, I'm not apologizing. I'm not gonna take ownership over this. So that's kind of like when we want to look at, is this always happening? Is this person never able to take ownership of their things? Or for the most part, they do. And every now and then there's certain things that they won't, right? So there's a difference between, is this often happening? And I feel like there's never any accountability. There's never any repair from this person. Or every now and then there isn't. And that feels very different. And that's kind of like where we look at this idea of giving ourselves grace for being human and not always being able to take accountability and repair. But if for the most part, we feel that our partners are able to do this, then that's a win. It's when we feel that there's a sense of unfairness, when we feel that this is constantly happening, that we get into that problematic stage, and, we end up going for help, or we end up going to a couples therapist.
I want to maybe pause a little bit longer in that in that conversation, and especially if you've been in, if you've been working on yourself for a long time, obviously your standards are going a little bit higher, and you expect a certain level of maturity from people in your relationships. With age as well, we expect a little bit more of maturity. And obviously there are no perfect people. So people are going to make mistakes. And how much of letting your standards slip is permissible, I think, in a relationship? Because if we are very rigid with the standard, there is a good chance nobody's going to live up to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's when I like to think about these idea of non-negotiables, right? So there's some standards that are that's my standard, but I could take it or leave it. But there's some things that are definitely non-negotiables that go to the core of who I am, that I'm not willing to compromise on, that I can't, because it goes against all that I know to be true. And then there's these other ones that I'm like, okay, I mean, that'd be nice, but if it doesn't work out and that standard isn't met, I can take it or leave it. So kind of being able to differentiate between the things that are really important to us and make us who we are, and things that we have to let go, that we have to compromise on, because as you say, then we're just going to be living on an island by ourselves, because we only like ourselves.
So it's still self-work. Without going to the next question, we have Sanguita here with us. Hi, Sanguita. You have to switch on your mic. Yes, your mic is on.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Christina, and hi, Maria.
Hi, Sanguita. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you. Very enlightening so far. I just have this question about judging. So I was just thinking, I've been told that, I judge too much, and I judge myself critically too much. Is it because I have this expectation of perfectionism that, I'm always like critically thinking about expecting things of myself, but then that also leads me to, like, when I meet a person, I'm immediately judging how they are. And I do want to kind of stop doing that so much and be able to actually maybe interact with the person, know the person first before judging. But I've been struggling with this and I don't know how to like stop judging someone immediately. Like what would you suggest?
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. And then also, any of the information that I share is just based on the few snippets of information that you have shared. I don't know enough about the situation. And if you're, doing this or whatever, it's just based on the things that you have shared. Um, it does sound like you are, possibly hard on yourself and having these expectations of yourself. And then again, sharing or kind of projecting these onto other individuals. And I'm curious if you could shift the focus in terms of, how you want these expectations to be met, but also in what ways you want to connect with this person, right? I'm curious about this person's story. I'm curious about what is interesting to them. So how do I make it about that other person so I can join them, meet them where they are at, connect with them, and not project this idea or this story of what I want this interaction to look like. I'm genuinely curious. Maybe I'm missing some things by only focusing on these check boxes that I have in my head. So thinking about the connection component and emphasizing that as opposed to these standards or the rigid kind of judgments that we may have for ourselves. And if you were to kind of do that, what would that look like for you? What would you say?
Okay. No, I think that's quite good, because I think that helps me think a bit more about, like, so not to have an expectation of when I meet the person, but more about having the interaction and then seeing, because a lot of the times I meet someone and I think this person, just by appearance, this person might be a certain way. And then after that, when talking to them, I realized that, okay, no, they're not. And so I was just thinking, is it because I'm always judging myself, expecting different things on myself, and that's why I project that on whoever I meet as well?
Yeah, you're robbing yourself of an opportunity to interact. You're robbing yourself of an opportunity to connect, and who knows what that would look like. So this idea of curiosity, being present in the moment and being mindful of what is happening or transpiring between you guys along that human connection, more of that feeling. What do I feel? How's the energy? What does this, person feel like to be around, as opposed to probably like the standards or the expectations that we've had for all of our lives.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of
Can
course.
I ask another question? Is that possible?
Judging by the time, yes, you can ask another question, Sangeeta.
Okay, thank you. So the other question I have is having this expectation of emotional intimacy. So I've not had that in relationships, because I feel like I put so much into them, and I feel then I feel like, oh, am I being needy by wanting emotional intimacy? So, and I've been told that I've only had a few relationships, but they've been making me feel like I'm asking for too much. And then I start to doubt myself. And then I'm thinking, am I emotionally needy? Am I, it makes you really go crazy. Like, or is this something that women expect, but men don't? I don't know. And I'm like, really don't like being on this journey to try and understand myself and whether my expectation is too much, or like, so where do you draw the line? Like, how do you know your expectation of wanting emotional intimacy is not like too much, or is a normal expectation?
Oh my gosh, yes, it is very much a normal expectation to want to have emotional intimacy. That is just, to be human is to want that emotional intimacy and connection. And I have the saying that it's not that you're needy, it's that you have unmet needs. So the fact that this need isn't being met makes you feel like you are needy. We have this label of being needy as this very negative thing, but essentially it's just saying there's this gap between, where I'm at and what I want to be feeling. And what I encourage at this moment is to kind of look at what does breaking down that word. So emotional intimacy. If I was in a relationship where there was emotional intimacy, what would be happening, right? So breaking down this big idea, because my emotional intimacy looks different for you, looks different for Christina. So if we break that down and say, emotional intimacy to me means being able to listen to a podcast and then breaking it down and understanding how that fits for us in our relationship, right? Emotional intimacy to me means this, and that, right? And then kind of looking at your partner's sense of what emotional intimacy means to them, so that we're speaking the same language, so that we're understanding what that means to them, where we match, where we mismatch. And then obviously, again, understanding that some people may not be able to meet our intimacy needs. It doesn't mean that we're being needy. It's just that this person might not be able to meet these needs that we have. And asking ourselves, if I was to continue in this relationship, would I be satisfied? Would I be feeling this sense of I'm in a relationship where I feel like this person listens to me, where I feel that, you know, I'm being considered, where I'm being respected, or am I sharing things and then being dismissed, right? Because a lot can happen between this conversation of, tell me a little bit about this emotional intimacy that you seek, and you're asking for too much. That's very dismissive. So if the person is more curious about understanding what this emotional intimacy means to you and how we can figure out a way for you to meet your emotional intimacy needs, that's very different than being dismissed and just being told that we're asking for too much.
Yes, but when would you say that? Say in a, like you said that in from the beginnings of a relationship, or do you say that later when you get to know the person? Because that's been my issue. I've not, because they made me feel like I'm emotionally needy, so I don't know when to
yeah, so usually the beginning of the relationships are just kind of getting to know that individual, right? So we're just kind of seeing how it feels. What are we doing? Do we enjoy each other's company? And then as we kind of get into more of a serious development, that's when we start kind of like having these conversations. And it looks like understanding that intimacy takes time. Intimacy takes this sense of safety, and safety can only be developed through experiences where we feel safe with this person, where we feel there's a sense of well-being, where we feel like we can share some of these vulnerable moments because they've shown themselves to be trustworthy persons. If from the beginning we feel that this person is dismissive, if from the beginning we feel like we can't share our thoughts with this person, chances are they're not going to be open to having this conversation about your emotional intimacy, because they might just not be able to have that. So you do pick up on some of those things at the beginning so that you can feel a sense of safety towards, more a little bit towards after that, those beginning stages.
Yes.
Sanguita, thank you for your questions. I do, and thank you for joining us and
thank you
for asking personal questions, because I think the interview changes pace always when we go into real life situations, our actual situations. But on the tailgate of those questions, I do want to ask a little bit, partially a politically incorrect question, partially. As I was listening to you guys, I was thinking that sometimes this readiness to talk about communication is in a way associated with how serious you are about a relationship. Whereas it would be safe to say that any kind of relationship, any kind of interaction is a relationship from the start. And whether you're going into a long-term relationship, which is romantic with possible marriage and kids, or just hanging around and seeing maybe you'll just be friends, maybe it won't be anything, there still can be a conversation about communication, about honesty, openness. Maybe you are trying it out, and after a few weeks you are willing to move on, and having had this conversation, you may be reducing the risk of being ghosted out of a relationship, because you mentioned that it's important for me to be just clear. It's fine if you leave, but but at least say so. But with that said, I also, the politically incorrect part is coming now. I also have a feeling
Waiting
that,
for it.
yeah, I also have a feeling that it is a more feminine thing to be analytical about this kind of things. And I do have a slight hunch that men are a little bit more laissez-faire about that thing. Like, oh, I either feel it or don't. They don't go into deep discussions. It's just, oh, it's not working or it's working. This is the politically incorrect part, because I do feel that we women and men, we do have a little bit different standards and expectations about communication and relationship.
Yeah,
I do not know, maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because I think men aren't encouraged to have, these kinds of conversations. Men are socially encouraged to be tough, to not show weakness, to not talk about their feelings, right? And so it really limits the conversations that they feel that they can have, when we sometimes reinforce this gender gap in terms of, well, this is just like how women are, this is not just how men are. But we see it when we look at relationships and people who come into the therapy room. I hear the conversations, I hear the feelings, they're there. There might be a different way to have the conversation so that it feels like a little bit more safe to have. But I think oftentimes, because of this idea, men feel like they can't share these things because it's just not allowed, or maybe they wouldn't be perceived as masculine or as manly. So I think it's great to actually kind of understand that as humans we have a need for connection, and if we kind of start with that baseline of connection and understanding that connection looks very different for each one of us. For some individuals it's through physical. So for some individuals, it's through this language and communication. For some, it's shared activities. And, there's just different ways that we want to connect. And it also depends on the person. I also do think that there is just this personal component, and you kind of also notice in the beginning of getting to know someone, some men are very articulate about their feelings, and they're able to kind of say it and share it and be forward about it. But I wish we had more conversations encouraging men, letting them know that it's okay to talk about these kinds of things.
And how to have this conversation without freaking out a person. Like, if you no, in the sense that when you start talking about, okay, how are we communicating in this, whatever you want to call it, for a lot of people, it's like, whoa, I'm not there yet. But for someone like me, for example, openness and honesty and sincerity communication is so important that I don't even care if we are together in 1 month. Can we have this conversation without freaking out another person, if that is your stand, if you do want to be clear from the start with anyone, even if you're not looking for a long-term relationship? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I think some of that is actually information, right? So if you are sharing something that's deeply important to you and that person freaks out and decides to just bounce out, that's information that person isn't able to meet you where you are at. I know we don't want to freak people out, but sometimes you might need to freak people out so that the person that is at the same kind of level where you're at meets you there. So the person that doesn't freak out when you share that information with them, that's the person that you continue with. Now, I'm not saying go on a first date and be like, listen, this is what I want in my life, and I'm just gonna like blurt it all out. Like, I'm definitely not encouraging that. But the people who are for you will not be scared of the things that are important for you. They will either resonate with that, or they will have something to add that makes you feel like, wow, like this is great that this person has the same feeling that I have. And that's what allows the relationship to continue. I think that any interaction where we show up as ourselves, where we are able to empower ourselves and share the things that we need, and be honest and be clear about that, that's information regarding how that person responds, right? So it's not that we've done anything wrong or that we've scared them. Okay, we may have scared them, but it's information about their capacity, where they are at, what they may be able to give to us at this point. Again, I wouldn't recommend it on the first date, but it sets forth this idea of this is important to me, and I want to share this, because not sharing it would be a betrayal to myself and my needs and the things that I want or value in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. So we're coming to that point where I actually wanted to ask that from the start, but there were so many other questions, and now we don't have much time left, so I have to ask it. So what is we were talking about standards and expectations and boundaries, and it's quite a lot of it's like a dance, where my standards maybe cross into your expectations, like encroaching, or the other way around. Your boundaries maybe are somehow pushing my standards, and so on and so on. Are there any like rules, general rules about navigating that landscape, all those lines which are somewhere between me and the relationship?
Yeah, so as a whole, I really like this idea of flexibility, of kind of just understanding that there isn't going to be this perfection. There is going to be this need to compromise. There is going to be a need to kind of understand that person's perspective and how it fits into your perspective. That's part of the flexibility in between those things. But where we don't want to go in terms of those boundaries is where we are overextending ourselves to make it work, where we are negating the things that are important to us to make sure that the relationship doesn't end, where we are compromising ourselves and the things that are important so that this person remains in our lives. We have to understand that, again, this idea of non-negotiables. This is non-negotiable for me. And if I am compromising on a non-negotiable, that means that this is a problem. That means that I'm not listening to myself, and that eventually this is going to fall down, or it's going to break down, because it goes to my core. It goes to the things that are important to me. And it'll eventually feel like resentment. So I will resent you later on because of this. I will feel that things aren't fair, that things have taken a twist somewhere along the way. I've lost my sense of self within the relationship because I've just continued to compromise. So might not show up in the moment, but it'll show up later on as well.
So basically there are two extremes. One where you compromise all your non-negotiables for the sake of maintaining a relationship, but the other one is when everything is a non-negotiable.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And so it's that, you said it perfectly. It's this dance, right? We're constantly dancing in between these two spaces, because this is the black and this is the white, and where we exist is somewhere in the gray. In our relationships, we're constantly in the gray. We are not alone. We have to manage ourselves, and we have to manage that person and dance the dance. You step forward, I step back, you step forward. And it's a delicate little balance in between those things. And again, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be things where you don't agree on. But if for the most part, you are repairing, you are looking for ways to work towards your relationship looking better, that's where it's at. And there's a ton of research to back this up. And if anybody wants to look into it, the Gottmans, so John and Julie Gottman, the Gottman Institute, they have some great content on this, some of the concepts that I've just shared. And it is this dance. It's understanding where we take and where we give, and repairing along the way.
So who knows the answers? Because it's you keep saying you have to check with yourself, right? What is important? Where's your value? Who has the answers for all of that? Or what kind of homework do people, those who have been with us today for almost an hour, so it's what kind of homework would you give us?
It's almost saying that the answer is that there is no answer, that you create the answer with this other individual, that your truth may not be that other person's truth, and you'll have to come together to create the answer that works best for you guys. So when we're focused too much on this is it and this is how it goes, there's rigidity. And when we say it's however they want it to go, then there's too much looseness and there's a problem there. So when we come together to have these conversations, to create this shared truth or this shared answer, then that's when we, have more of these fulfilling and rewarding imperfect relationships.
Mm. I like that you added imperfect. I know I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to squeeze this one little question in. So since you are a therapist and you've seen quite a lot of people, and I know you say that the answer is almost like there's no answer. What is the one mistake that because I'm sure you do give diagnosis to people when you see them just from your experience, like, oh, I see what's going on. So what's the biggest mistake that most people do with this dance?
Good question. So the dance of the back and forth, the stuckness. So what I notice a lot is that we get stuck in these patterns and that we're not able to try something different, right? It's just how we've done it our whole lives. This is just how it's always been. And I don't know how to do anything else, right? So it's trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So what I recommend is try something different, anything different, just anything that looks different to what you have already been doing. May work, may not work. We have no idea, but we know exactly what's going to happen if we continue to do the exact same dance that we've been doing before. Maybe you've always been the person to bring up your needs, right? And the other person hasn't. So how about the other person takes a jab at, stating or sharing all of their needs and you just listen. We've just changed the dance that you guys have been stuck in for a very long time. Now it looks a little different. What happened? What information can we gather from this? Or maybe your role has always been to be the planner and the other person just kind of shows up. Well, now you're going to be the planner and you're just going to show up. What does that look like? How does that, change the relationship dynamics and the roles that you're in? Just kind of looking at the patterns that you've been in. And if it feels stuck, try something different. And it sounds so basic, but you'd be surprised how people are just like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing the same thing. And I'm going to try and figure this out. No, just do anything that is different to what you've already been doing.
I actually like this interesting twist to that. The stuckness is usually the problem. Unfortunately, we have to be finishing very soon. I just saw Faz asking if you could ask your question. I won't bring you up because it will take longer than we have time for. So I'm going to do my traditional. Meanwhile, I'll ask Faz, I'll ask you a question, I'll read it out for Maria. Meanwhile, I want to ask everyone who is listening in right now online to leave a heart for my wonderful guest and your thanks. And those who are going to be listening and recording, you can leave the heart under the video. And while you're doing that, a question from Faz, if you can answer it very quickly. I'm sorry, Maria, for such
I got it. Rapid fire. I'm going to do one word. We
have a live stage. Yes. So the question from Faz was, how do you bring yourself back from a standard you had and let slip?
Oh, that's a good one.
That was a good question. Sorry we didn't get to.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like very much that self-worth and like reconnecting with your inner wisdom and kind of, you've had this standard for a reason. There's an importance here. How do you recognize your value and your worth within this relationship? And ask for that, essentially. So it may have been, hey, I know that I didn't prioritize this at some point in our relationship, but I'd really like to bring it up because it actually does matter to me. And now it's as good as time as any, right? So it's never too late to bring back this thing that was really important. Now the other person may be like, well, like where we are in our relationship, I don't even know how to go about meeting this standard, or that's just not the type of relationship we have anymore. And that's also information for yourself regarding, well, then you'd have to compromise, or you'd have to kind of shove that standard down for yourself in order to be in that relationship. And is that a relationship you want to stay in if you'd have to quiet or silence that part of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Faz. Thank you, everyone who was commenting and leaving hearts. It was a very interesting conversation. Maria, maybe you can remind people where to find you if they want to keep following you or work with you
so you can, perfect. So you can find me on Instagram at Holistically Grace. My middle name is Grace, and so that's where that grace comes from. But I also think it's wonderful to give ourselves that grace, as we are human and we really, need that more than anything. And then my website is holisticallygrace.com. So, that is it. You can find me. I've also got a little booking app. So if you want to book, if you're in the United States, and especially in the state of Florida, for therapy, then there's a little booking app there that's available to you as well. And thank you so much for having me, Christina. This was a great conversation. Thank you for making it easy and enjoyable.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bianca, behind the scenes. And I hope I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.